Welcome back to the Glitchless Speedrun tutorial for Nicktoons Unite. Today we will be discussing the game's basic mechanics, including the controls, survival, items, and character differences. Before we begin, I would highly recommend that you watch part 1, so you're prepared to learn about the game itself. Moving forward, I would also strongly advise you to watch every part in order. With that being said, let's get into it. First, let's talk controls. Keep in mind I'll be referring to GameCube buttons, but I will also put the PS2 buttons on screen. Start pauses the game, and is also the join in button for extra players. The left stick is for movement. Okay, now that the obvious stuff is out of the way. This game's button layout is actually a little strange. Pressing the A button will cause your character to attack. Pressing X will cause your character to jump. Pressing X and then A mid-jump will perform a slam jump. This ground pound is usually just used to press buttons, but is also for stunning enemies and lowering shields on bigger ones. The B button is what I like to call the interact button, as most of the time you'll use it for things like talking to NPCs, picking up and putting down objects, pulling levers, or doing certain character-specific abilities. If you're used to jump being on A, then this understandably might take some time to get used to. However, the face button layout is actually similar to Super Smash Bros. If you ever played that with the GameCube controller. The Y button will rearrange your teammates. This is not very helpful in a lot of cases, as I didn't even know you could do this until I looked through the manual, but I mean, it's nice to know, I guess. Pressing the Z button will cause your character to raise a shield, at the cost of gradually draining power. The L and R buttons will cycle through your current character's unlocked weapons. Lastly, the D-pad is how you switch characters. If you look at the bottom left corner where the characters' faces are, you'll notice they are in the shape of 4 arrows. This is because every direction on the D-pad is hard locked to one character, so you can match the direction on the D-pad to that character. If using Dolphin, I'd highly recommend you use a different controller because the GameCube controller's notoriously awful D-pad that was built for ants makes switching characters and related techniques harder. I personally use and would recommend an Xbox One controller for its very defined and clicky D-pad, but use whatever works best for you. Combat is something you'll need to be prepared for in this game, as many levels will force you to fight off waves of enemies before progressing. If you look back at the character icons, you'll notice the green and purple bars next to their pictures. Green is their health and purple is their power. Power is essentially a magic or a mana meter that is gradually depleted as shields, special abilities, and charged attacks are used throughout the levels. If the purple bar is completely empty, that character cannot use any of their special abilities until enough power has been regained, and they will just exclaim that they can't do it until then.
I need power! Can't do that without power! I need power! I'm out of power!
The number is the remaining amount of recalls or lives that the entire party has left. The other characters that are not being played as can and will take damage and lose your lives, so paying attention to everyone is essential to survival. If a character is in critical condition, their expression will become distraught as their face starts to pulse red and they will say out loud that they are in trouble.
Some help here, guys? A little help here? Hey, everyone! I need help! A little help here!
If the life counter hits 0 or everybody is knocked out at once, you'll get a game over and will have to restart the entire level from the beginning. This is obviously very, very bad as this game's levels are quite long to the point where if this happens you might as well just reset the run. When fighting enemies, it is key to remembering how to take out each type effectively to make combat as swift as possible with minimal risk of death. Syndicate grunts are the most basic enemies who will throw fireballs or slam the ground right in front of them. These guys are just attack sponges and very rarely pose a threat. They come in 3 colors, with blue having the least health, then green, then red which will have the most health. Ghosts will raise their arm and then lunge towards you. In later levels, Ghosts will also do an attack where they spin in a tornado for a few seconds, starting with Jellyfish Fields. The best thing to do is to shield them right before their attack connects, stun them with a slam jump, and then kill them before they wake up. They cannot be hurt when phased out, however if Danny is also phased out he can hurt them. You can also force them to phase back in by blinding them with a flare gun. Phase soldiers will phase in and out, summoning enemies each time. The initial phasing can do damage if you're close enough to it. Same thing applies to them with their phase state, however in every case of them showing up you can just ignore them. Doomsday troopers will raise a shield, then either spin in a circle or charge forward. If you have to fight them, it is best to stun them, then either freeze or shrink them before attacking them so they'll die instantly. All enemies up to this point can also be instantly killed by knocking them off of the stage. Bikini Bottom introduces the Plankton Poppers, and this strategy is best for them too. If you've ever played this game, then you already know that these guys are without a single doubt the most annoying enemy in the game, as they will constantly shoot mines around them that explode when you get near them, or they'll just snipe you with them. The last types of enemies, being the Fleabots and Goddard's Immune System Nanobots, only show up in the last main level of the game, so I'll discuss them in that level's dedicated video. Items are a staple to any platformer, and this game is no exception. Items will be found all across every stage and will give different effects when picked up. Pods like these are glowing spheres that come in 4 different colors. Green increase your health, purple increase your power. Whoever picks it up will receive the most from it, with everybody else only receiving a fraction of that. Large ones will restore about 50% of the bar, while small ones will restore about 10% of the bar, and are typically dropped by enemies. Purple ones also have a super variant that will immediately restore all power and will give its collector infinite power for a short period of time. Red pods will give whoever picked it up a damage boost for a little bit, doubling their attack strength. Blue pods like these will give the character that grabbed it a shield, making them completely invulnerable until it wears off. These green vortex looking things will give the party an extra life. If you see any that are on the beaten path, I'd highly recommend you don't miss it, especially if you aren't confident in your skills. Later levels and bosses will start to throw everything in the kitchen sink at you, and if you've played the game, you know that there is one in particular that will just devour your lives, and that's the last thing you want to happen, is to get a game over right at the end of the game, or to get past it and then not have enough lives during the final boss. Ability pods will be found in the levels, and upon entering them will grant someone a new permanent ability, depending on the color and icon. Lastly, there are energy tokens found throughout every level, which I'll just call coins. Coins will come in 3 different colors. Orange is worth 1, blue is worth 10, and gold is worth 50. Coins are given to the player and not the character, so you can switch around and not worry about losing coins. In multiplayer, if somebody leaves the game, their coins will be evenly distributed to everybody who's still playing. Coins are to be spent on purchasable upgrades to every ability in the game. Every ability can be upgraded twice, with them typically granting you a charge attack and lowering how much power they will drain upon usage. Coins are everywhere, so you shouldn't have to worry about it too much, but it should still be worth mentioning that you need to grab them because of one upgrade specifically. It's also important to remember that even if you quit the game, your coins will carry on to that new file. Not sure why the game does this, but because of it you have to do runs from a fresh reboot of the console if you do have to reset. Speaking of which, our last thing to discuss is the characters, what they can do, and their practicality in the game. Since in New Game Plus you'll have every ability unlocked, this is good knowledge to have off of the bat. SpongeBob's basic attack is his foam karate gloves. You can repeatedly chain chops together without any cooldown, and these come out fast too to make up for his lacking strength. Upgrading them will give him a charge attack that causes a splash effect around him. SpongeBob will unlock the ability to soak up water with the droplet icon above it. This is only really used for puzzles involving filling something with water, putting out fires, or watering dried out plants. Falling from a large height with it will cause him to lose all the water, so be careful. SpongeBob will then unlock the Doodlebob lure, which he can throw to have Doodlebob draw enemies and jellyfish towards him. This is only really used for puzzles where you need to have an enemy moved over to a button with a foot icon on it. Oh, of course, the Nickelodeon game has feet. SpongeBob will unlock his last ability, the Bubble Bomb. These can be picked up and thrown at enemies, but are usually to be thrown at cracked walls and the like to break them. As I had discovered a couple years ago, Bubble Bombs are insanely strong and they just completely shred through bosses, making SpongeBob the go-to character for boss fights once he unlocks them. In normal Glitchless, this is definitely the one move you need to dump your coins into, so you can spam them without risking running out of power. Timmy is a ranged character and his basic attack is a star flinger. Cosmo shoots stars out that aren't very strong but come out quickly and are good for taking out smaller enemies from a distance. At level 2 they will shoot 3 stars when charged, and when maxed out the charge attack will instantly kill any enemy by turning them into a throwable object, along with naturally shooting 3 stars at once. Occasionally it is needed for switches with a star on them. Timmy will unlock the freeze glove, which is used to break glowing blue objects and freeze things like water so you can walk on it before it melts. It can also freeze enemies, causing them to die instantly if you attack while they're frozen, which is very useful for stronger and more annoying enemies. Upgrading it will let you charge it, and maxed out, Timmy can throw a projectile that will explode in 5 directions, freezing everything it touches. Timmy will next unlock his Clef the Boychin Wonder costume. This is mainly used to turn strong wheels or lift heavy objects for puzzles, but this also turns Timmy into a melee character, as he can use the metal hand to slap enemies around a bit. When fully upgraded, he can charge it to release a shockwave that travels along the ground a decent distance. Timmy's final ability is a magic remedy. By holding the B button, Timmy will stop what he's doing while Cosmo and Wanda heal the team. Because Timmy's a selfish little punk, he heals faster than everybody else. Upgrades for this will reduce how much power it drains and increase how much health it gives. Honestly, with how slow the startup and healing process is, I would only recommend using it if you're not swamped with enemies and are seriously on the verge of a game over. Timmy may start out rather weak, but when he's fully upgraded, he turns into a borderline broken alpha male that just destroys everything in his path with ease. Jimmy is also a ranged character, starting with a Tornado Blaster. This attack fires a big burst of air at enemies that is stronger but much slower than the Star Flinger. When fully upgraded, the charge attack will deploy a tornado that travels along the ground for a few seconds. Jimmy will then unlock his Shrink Ray, which is mainly used for puzzles involving shrinking and picking up objects that have a purple box icon over them. This can also shrink stunned enemies, making them die instantly when attacked in this state. When upgraded, it will bounce onto other objects, and he can shrink everybody to fit under tight spaces, which has zero practicality in the speedrun and is only useful for getting coins in a single room in the game. Jimmy will then unlock the Neutron Flare, which is used for puzzles involving lighting things on fire or burning things like ropes that are too far away. This also can blind and stun enemies, which is useful for phasing in phased out ghosts if Danny can't be used. When upgraded, the charge attack will explode into smaller particles that slowly fall down, which can also do extra damage. Jimmy's last ability is the quarterback gear, which is used to press buttons with a helmet symbol on them. Hitting enemies with this will also stun and then hurt them, and when upgraded, Jimmy can use it to sprint until he hits something or runs out of power. Side note, but this is so stupid. Like, why would Jimmy ever play football? Where did they even get that idea from? Like, there's literally only one episode in the entire show where he plays a sport and it's baseball, so where does football come from? Whatever, I don't know. Anyway, Jimmy's Shrink Ray and quarterback gear being so situational and the Shrink Ray and Flare only helping in combat if Timmy or Danny aren't available makes him the least useful character in the game, and you'll probably only use him when he's mandatory. Danny is the other melee fighter, and his ghost punches have a 3-hit combo that is stronger yet slower than SpongeBob's karate. However, as everybody in the game has the same running speed, Danny is actually the character you'll be using the most since the last attack in his combo lunges him forward a bit, making him the fastest traveler. For New Game Plus runs, the one upgrade you do not want is level 3 Ghost Punch because the last attack turns into an axe kick that doesn't travel as far and it is not worth slowing yourself down for. Danny will unlock the Overshadow move, which lets him possess stunned enemies and control them. Usually this is used if certain enemies are the only things that can pass through specific gates or barriers. Because most enemies are slower than Danny, this doesn't get much mileage outside of when it's mandatory. Danny will then unlock the Phase Shift where he can walk through green walls, disappear, and glide short distances. Once you unlock this, it is one of the most useful abilities for skipping fights as you can just walk through enemies and ignore taking damage. This does drain power when it's used, so you want to try and only really use it when enemies are near you, although upgrades will reduce the power usage. Lastly, Danny unlocks his Ghostly Whale, which is used to break certain types of glass for puzzles. It can also stun and push back enemies, and the upgrades will increase the range and power. Other than that, it isn't very useful though. Danny being the fastest on foot, and him being at least okay in combat, makes him the character you need to focus on for a vast majority of the game. Now that you've sat through all of that, you should be ready to start learning the levels themselves, and how you'll tackle each of them in the run. Join me next time where we go over the first level in the game, the Ghost Zone Prison.